Yeah, it looks like it worked. So we're all set. I'll bring up the PowerPoint. Forgive me, one of the cases I wasn't able to get fully up, but we'll walk through it when we get to there, to that point. One sec.
Okay, you're a little quiet, Luis. Could you come closer to your microphone or pull it up out of your chin?
Is that better? Okay. One sec. It's like many things to handle at once. Just give me 1 second pulling up the PowerPoint.
Yep.
All right, here we go. All right, can everyone see the PowerPoint? All right.
Yes.
Yes.
So welcome everyone to the February 10th workshop for the Board of Zoning Appeals. The time is 6:02 p.m. And this is going to be an opportunity for the board members to become familiarized with the cases for the upcoming February hearing. And we'll just get into it. So new business, we have first on the agenda 41 South Pine Avenue. So 41 South Pine, we have Dan Hirschberg representing agent for this. This is for a replacement porch that uses columns with masonry elements and the relocation of steps from a left offset to a center offset. Now this case has a total of 6 requests, which is a little unusual, but we have an interpretation, a set of interpretations that are being requested, as well as a set of variances that are being requested. The applicant is asking for the board to consider the applicability of the ordinance to the project and these 3 interpretations for these ordinances. And if the board does not or chooses that the interpretation applies to the project, then the applicant subsequently requests for variances to those 3 ordinances as well. So a total of 6 requests from the board for this case for the porch. So we'll get into that next. The location of the case is in the Pine Hills neighborhood, as you can see with the red box. It is around the Western Avenue, Madison Avenue intersection, crossing down South Pine there. It is in a residential 2-family zoning district, and you can see the makeup of the zoning district surrounding it. This is an overview of the property as it relates to Madison Avenue and Western Avenue, where it splits, coming down Pine Avenue. And this is a 3-photo lineup here of the original porch, as is evidenced by a photo submitted by the applicant with the original porch elements. The existing porch in the middle, which shows how some elements have changed since the original design. And then the applicant's proposed porch on the right, which shows the elements changed on that proposal as it relates to what is existing and also what was original to the structure, or what can be presumed to be original to the structure. So first, the interpretations that are being requested, I'll go through each one by one as it relates to the ordinance that is being applied here. First, what the review criteria is for the interpretation in our ordinance. It defines that the decision made by a chief planning official is subject to appeal to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and an applicant may request a formal written interpretation of the Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance be made by the board. So that is what the applicant is doing here for the 3 regulations that apply to their proposal. So the applicant is requesting that the chief building official be informed that the building permit, as it was submitted originally, or as the porch is proposed, shall be approved, and that the board should not support the interpretation of the chief planning official. So the first interpretation is interpretation case 005, and this is for the first ordinance in question, 375-4G3, which relates to compatibility of infill, additions, and expansions. The regulation indicates that it is applicable to infill construction, including principal structures, accessory structures, and building additions, and those shall be designed to be no greater than the average setbacks, heights, and building bulk of buildings, with similar principal uses on the same block face and the facing block face to the maximum degree practicable. Furthermore, building characteristics such as roof pitches, gables, and the inclusion or not of porches, shutters, and other exterior elements shall conform to the residential buildings on the same block face and the facing block face to the maximum degree practicable in order to preserve the character of the block face. We define infill as new development or redevelopment of buildings and structures on vacant or underused lots within areas containing existing structures. So the applicant is indicating that for this, the proposed building and its porch do not meet the definition of infill construction, and as such, the Board of Zoning Appeals should indicate that the chief planning official's interpretation should not be supported. And if we wanted to open it up for discussion here, we can do that, or I can move on to the other two interpretations before any discussion.
Any questions, board members?
Can we go back to that definition of infill just for a moment? Does the city have any sort of financial threshold by which they categorize what redevelopment may stand for? Or if there's a regulatory review triggered by certain types of reconstruction within a building envelope? For example, let's say I want to put in a new kitchen. I wouldn't classify putting in a new kitchen as redevelopment. It would more be an upgrade or maintenance. Is there any sort of threshold, or the vacant building across the street from me, the owner tore all the building down to studs? That to me seems almost like a redevelopment, but it's not. If it were to be reconstructed, it wouldn't change use. So I'm curious if there are any standards that the planning department uses to qualify something as redevelopment or infill versus something like a traditional gut rehab or a significant home improvement project.
I'll put in what the ordinance says about redevelopment in the PowerPoint, so it's easy for everyone to see. Can everyone see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So a change to previously existing improved property, including but not limited to the demolition or building of structures, filling, grading, paving, or excavating, but excluding ordinary maintenance activities.
So, Luis, I guess the answer to Martin's question is development and redevelopment are things that happen to the outside of a structure, not the inside, like a kitchen.
It can be interpreted that way. However, I can't say that would be generally how it's applied, because they're just by virtue of I know how some projects are applied and how conditional use permits are done. It sometimes might be applied to an interior. So I can't say for sure, but I can look into that and see if there is a definitive way that we uniformly apply redevelopment or development, and if that applies kind of universally, or if it is contextual.
I mean, just stretching that example out. I mean, my house has aluminum siding. If I wanted to put cedar shake on it, or heaven forbid, I wanted to put vinyl on it, but that to me would be a significant change to the exterior of the house. But I wouldn't qualify that personally as redevelopment.
I think we should also go back to the definition of infill here, and it mentions vacant or underused lots. I think that is also a significant part of this definition to be taken into account.
Well, in fact, I would argue it's the threshold question.
Yeah. Because this one certainly isn't vacant or underused.
Louis, so what are they proposing, that it's something else than an infill, the applicant?
So what they're saying that is that they're not saying what it is, they're saying what it's not. So they're saying that it doesn't qualify as infill, so the interpretation should not be supported. So that was the extent of the argument there. So that not necessarily that it's defined as something else, or making that interpretation for the board, but just rather that it's not infill and leaving it up to the board to decide what it is if they want to.
Well, these are the sections that were cited in the denial of their request, right?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
These three interpretations that they're looking for, these three sections were, they were cited as the reasons for not allowing the porch change, right?
Right, yes, these were the regulations that were pointed out in the denial to the applicant.
Louise, do you know, like, so, I'm interested in the part of the definition that says it excludes maintenance. Do you know to what extent there, like, is a whole porch being removed and they're replacing it or maintain, like, I'm curious to a point of like new construction of the porch and like if it's a whole new porch or if they are salvaging and reusing a lot of the existing, like the floor boards of the porch.
The applicant did list what exactly they were looking to salvage and what they were looking to replace. So it's not going to be completely removed. There are some portions and elements of the porch that will be that will remain. So like I think you said the floor. Let me see if I can just pull up their application real quick. I'll tell you exactly what we have. Okay. So the materials, I'm not sure if you guys can see my PDF here.
Yep.
Okay. So the materials that will remain unchanged are the width, depth, height, and those dimensional things, but the balusters and railings around the porch will remain. Let's see. And these materials will be changed. But from what it looks like, it seems like there are portions of the porch that are going to remain. Right, I'm not sure actually about the floor. It doesn't mention the floor.
Yeah, and I just use the floor as an example because like what I see on your list there, it's more like we're maintaining the dimensions, but it's like we're taking off the whole porch and then we'll just reassemble it with like the, railings, but everything else is new material. That's just the way I'm reading it, but.
So if that were a question from Paige, Louise, do they have an answer to that in their application? You're on mute. If the answer is no, then we should ask them to provide us with a simple yes/no answer to, are you essentially replacing everything except the balusters and the railings?
Okay, yeah, I'll get that information from the applicant.
Thanks.
Yeah, because I think that helps me differentiate between infill, as in like this is all new construction, versus maintenance, where we're just taking off a couple of things and putting in a new 2x4 versus not.
Can we go back to the definitions that Chris cited in his denial of the request? Although I like the picture, the color picture at the bottom. It's a very pretty picture. Okay, so let's start with the threshold question, which is infill occurs on hang on. This is missing the piece about an empty or underpopulated parcel. unless I'm just missing it when I'm reading it.
This should be the full extent of the ordinance as far as G3 goes. There are other subsequent sections, but this, as far as what was cited for the denial, this is the entirety of 375.4 G3.
Okay. Oh, that's right. We looked at the definition of infill too, which was specifically, you added it to the other slide, Louis, I think. Yeah, no, here it is. Vacant or underused lot. So as a practical matter, that lot's not vacant, it has a house sitting on it. And so it doesn't meet that requirement of infill. The issue of what is underused, do you have a definition for underused, Louis?
I can check real quick. Does not look like we have that.
Okay, so going back to the first statute that Chris denied him on, it wouldn't be infill if it wasn't either an empty lot or an underused lot. So we know it's not empty. So we would have to be determining that underused is somehow a lot that contains a principal structure on it. And I didn't see if they had a garage. I'm assuming there's an accessory structure also.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So we would have to determine that an underused lot is one that has a principal structure on it and potentially an accessory structure also, because I didn't see if they had a garage.
I think you would want to compare this to what's permitted under the zoning. So this is an R2 district, and it's a residential structure.
I can't immediately tell if there is a garage.
Okay, so for me, the thing that we would have to find to determine that this was, or I'm sorry, to interpret that this was somehow infill would be that it has to be an underused lot. That would be our first step. So ask them to send them a note, Luis, and ask them to tell us why they think it's underused.
Yeah. I just want to reiterate, though, I think the applicant is saying that it doesn't meet the definition of infill. Is that what we're saying here? That they need to qualify infill first before they can say it is not that?
They want us to say that again, Luis?
So the applicant is saying that the proposed porch does not meet the definition of infill, so that they're saying they don't meet that criteria of classifying the project as infill. I don't think they're saying that it does.
They're saying that this provision doesn't apply to them because they're not infill.
Okay. Does anyone have any more questions on this this provision? You want to move to the next one then?
The next interpretation would be for building design standards for building materials. The application was originally denied because original materials, or this ordinance wasn't clear as being compliant. Original materials shall be retained, maintained, repaired, or uncovered wherever possible and to the maximum extent feasible, new buildings and alterations shall be composed of materials that complement adjacent facades and are compatible with the quality and appearance of traditional materials. So this would be relating more to the original materials that are related to the application, to the porch. So the applicant indicated that original materials have been retained and repaired where their condition allowed. And they indicated that other American Foursquare style homes are of a traditional style and can contain that element in them. And therefore the interpretation should not be supported by the Board of Zoning Appeals that this regulation applies.
I think that the missing element within that response to the question is where the non-original materials have been chosen for this project, like the bluestone. Just a matter of why. Are the original materials more susceptible to rot? Is there an environmental feature or a use feature which encourage the applicant to use different materials in this case? I think that's just something that the answer to that would help supplement the record.
I think that the narrative kind of says that, like, there's
Okay, I must have missed it then.
Yeah. And I think it also going back to like the question of whether how much construction or demolition of the current permit, I don't know. It says reconstruct a dilapidated porch. And it talks about the fact that the reason for the whole project is they noticed rot in the wood. And so that's why they're thinking of switching to or at least that was what I very briefly quickly read.
Right. And just that's not, I understand that. It's just, it's not unique to this house. I mean,
Yeah.
most of the houses in Albany have
That problem.
porches supported by wood or wood products. So if there's a uniqueness to this situation that drove them to choose alternate materials without making an assessment that any and all original materials in this ordinance is somehow can be just not applicable, we'd like them to be able to make that case.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions from the rest of the board? I'll take that as a no.
I got a question maybe for the chair or council. In some of these circumstances, we have asked for advisory opinions of experts, potentially from the Historic Resources Commission or other entities to kind of help us with these questions that are, when it comes to things like style, which I will tell you, and my wife will tell you, I'm no expert on. So how much ability does this board have to ask for some sort of advice from folks that are more familiar with this stuff?
Right, that was one.
You want to ask the HRC to give us an opinion?
I know this is not in a historic district.
Yeah.
And on the 5 minutes of research I've done, I found that I have found that I've seen other American Foursquares use a variety of materials. Certainly Frank Lloyd Wright incorporated those types of materials into his designs. But I don't want to let that rest on the internet. I would prefer someone whose cap and trade is this to offer us a little bit of perspective. I would find that helpful if that's allowed.
Rich,
Oh, we can ask them.
if I could speak to this, I think in the context of an interpretation and appeal, I think it would perhaps be best to leave this to the chief planning official and then the applicants to decide whether or not they want to submit expert testimony.
But not seek it out ourselves. And now,
Rich, I mean,
okay.
if Rich, if you guys would like to solicit expert testimony, I don't think that's out of bounds. I'll leave that to you guys.
Well, right, that's one thing that I noticed in their application. So Foursquare, like to my understanding, like, and I do some work in historic preservation, but I wouldn't mark myself as an expert. Foursquare is like the style. It's not a style. It's the way a home is built. It's not a style. Like Prairie is a style, Craftsman is a style,
Yep.
but Foursquare is the architectural, like, I don't like the construction of the house is based on like, 4 cornerstones. And in their application, if I'm not mistaken, the pictures they gave of Foursquare homes were all from the internet definition of Foursquare. They weren't Albany, Allen Street, Pine Street examples of Foursquare architecture. So it's just, that's something that I think I would be interested to hear from someone who can speak confidently about it. But
Yeah, let's ask them to provide something a little bit better for their rationale for this. And they can get an opinion from the HRC, or they can get an opinion from whomever. There are no shortage of historic preservationists in Albany and historic preservation entities.
I just think it would help supplement the narrative for us to be able to get a more complete picture of this.
I mean, I'm not sure that I want to counsel HRC to get involved in providing, expert testimony approved by the whole board.
Right, and they're not asking for HRC's opinion. I know that. I want to be as well informed about how the USDO interprets style and be able to look at this case objectively.
Yeah, we're not asking them, we're not telling them go to get an opinion from X, but rather make a better argument. So I don't think that's harmful unless you you believe it's harmful in some way, or that we might get
No,
the HRC might deliver an opinion that is not supported by action of the board.
my concern is that this isn't a historic district, so HRC doesn't have jurisdiction. I'm counsel to HRC too. So if you were going to reach out to HRC and ask for an official opinion, I'm not sure that I would counsel them to provide that because it's outside their jurisdiction. If the board wants to solicit an opinion, I think that's fine, but you need to find a different expert.
No, I think we talked through that and
Yeah.
determined
that argument.
the applicant's best ability to put that forward.
Yeah, you won that argument. We're on the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does anyone else have things that they wish to ask the applicants to provide?
Oh, I have one question. There was a picture of a porch that was included with the application, a rendering. Is that, are they advanced long enough to have that be the rendering of what they're doing on the far right? Is that the actual product? Is that the end product, or is that an example of the end product? That's just.
I'll get confirmation from the applicant.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on this one? No? Last chance until the next one. Okay, do you want to keep going, Louise?
Interpretation 007. This one will be relating to building design standards and the ordinances that relate specifically to porches. So we have 3 parts of this. The one that we're using is part 1. All porches shall be retained in their original style with appropriate support, balusters, railings, and frame lattice work to the maximum extent practicable. The applicant indicated that the proposed porch is for the most part retained or replaced with matching materials, including portions of columns, spacing of columns, balusters, and railings, and therefore the applicability of the ordinance should not be supported by the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Could you skip back to the previous slide, Louis? So is it their argument that their action is retaining to the maximum extent practicable? Or do they just want us to wipe that out of the statute?
I think they're making the argument that that there is some they're retaining some portions of it, and asking the board to interpret that as not meeting a certain threshold to apply that interpretation.
But they don't actually use the magic language, in other words. Because if you're guessing at what they're thinking, then, you know, for me, that's a NO. They need to actually say it.
I'll relay that.
So yeah, ask them to respond to that question. Do they at any point say that they want to just get us to interpret that the neighborhood design standards don't apply to this project? You're on mute again, Louis.
I do believe so. Let me just pull up their interpretation. One sec.
Oh, another fan.
To get back to you on that, I do believe that the applicant does indicate that that they should not apply. Is this it? No, it's the photo array.
So
There it is.
if they don't explicitly say that, ask them to answer that question, please.
Okay. I think the conclusion. Yeah, the conclusion just pretty much says that the CPO's decision should not be or supported by the board, but it doesn't specifically go into each. You know, that ask is not included in each interpretation.
Okay, I mean, let's put it this way. I'm obviously going to ask that question of them, so they might as well come up with an answer for it. Here's the next question. This is one of Martin's questions from time to time. So if we did this, if we granted the interpretations they're asking for, why doesn't it apply to every structure in the neighborhood design area of Pine Hill? So why won't we have eliminated at that point the entire neighborhood design requirement? Any other questions from the board, or do you want to move on to the variances, assuming that? Well, let me ask another question before we pass by this totally. Are they willing or able to do the project if they don't get all three of these interpretations?
I can get confirmation on that.
Yeah, they should speak to that. Again, I will ask that question when they're in front of them.
I think we mentioned this briefly on one of the previous interpretations, but I'd be interested to see if the applicant can provide more information beyond, you know, the base of the columns or rotting as to what exactly the statuses of the porch. Because based on the rendering they provided for the new porch, it looks, it looks a bit different from the state of the original porch. So I'm just curious as to, what is maybe more cosmetic versus what is actually needed for the porch.
Luis, do you know what year the house was constructed?
I don't have that information, unfortunately. I can get that if the records go back far, though.
Yeah, I'd be curious, not to backtrack, but for them to identify the year the home was constructed and the style that they believe the front porch is in.
Okay, any more questions for the applicant on the issue of the interpretation? And remember, we can always go back, but let's move on then to the variances they're asking for, Louis.
Okay, so variances. So for the criteria for reviewing of area variances, in making a determination regarding a request for a variance, the BZA shall take into consideration the benefit to the applicant if the variance is granted, as weighed against the detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood or community. In making such determination, the BZA shall also consider whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by granting the area variance, whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance, whether the requested area variance is substantial, whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district, whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which consideration shall be relevant to the decision of the BZA but shall not necessarily preclude the granting of the area variance. So this is the ordinance review criteria for area variances or variances in general. And the first variance is relevant to section 375-4 G3 for compatibility of infill additions and expansions, as we reviewed for interpretations regarding infill construction and building characteristics. So the applicant made 4 general arguments regarding the character of the neighborhood. They indicated that the proposed changes in porch construction will create no undesirable change in the neighborhood or a detriment to adjoining properties. That by replacing the deteriorated wood with construction with architecturally pleasing blue stone column bases and walls bordering the steps in the building, the appearance will be enhanced. That the letters of support that were included, as well as the petition that was signed by surrounding neighbors, demonstrate that nearby properties do not believe that the changes create any detriment to their properties. And finally, because the porch is an exterior element, does not violate any standard of conformity on the block, because there is no conformity, because there is a sufficient variety of examples of architecture that there is no one conformity or an overall prevailing theme. So the applicant indicated that there's a wide variety of homes, that there's no common recurrent motif, that homes have different shapes, sizes, and decorative features, and some houses have no porches and others have partial porches or wrapped around porches. And I can continue through the categories if the board has any questions on this specific category.
Anyone have any questions for the applicant on this? Could you back up to the previous slide, Louise? Sorry. So he never actually answered the question. These 4 columns are all why it is not harmful or not a detriment to the neighborhood. It doesn't actually say how it is in character. It's all negative. So ask him if he can make his answer actually apply to the question that he's being asked a little bit. He does describe the character a little bit more on the next slide that you have. Yeah, if you can go to the next one, Louise, sorry. But I mean, to me, and please chip in, this is actually saying there is no character because there's no uniformity, there's a wide variety, there's no motif, they're all different sizes, some have porches, some don't. So it's essentially saying there is no character, and that's why we're not harming the character in the neighborhood. Am I missing something, or?
No, I think that's what they're saying.
I think it would be helpful for us to know if there are other houses in the neighborhood that have the type of porch that they're proposing or something similar.
Okay, if you could ask him that question, Luis, then have him bring it back to us at the public hearing.
There might be a question of if there needs to be a definition of what constitutes a sufficient enough proximity to say it's comparable. The applicant provided a photo array of all the houses on Pine Avenue and used that as as basically how it doesn't have the character. I don't know if the board wants to expand that further out to have to compare and see if there's another example. I believe there are examples generally of those homes in Albany, but I'm not sure if they're really that close to that specific to 41 Pine Avenue, South Pine Avenue, and whether or not if the board wants to define like what distance is acceptable.
If I could just comment, the character of the neighborhood is inherently a somewhat subjective, criteria to be used in these cases. So it is up to the BZA to decide what you're going to call the character of the neighborhood. I would just ask that however you're going to look at this, you have some reasons for how you're defining the character of the neighborhood.
Does anyone have any more questions about this element of character of the neighborhood? Okay, do you want to keep going, Louis?
So for alternatives considered, the applicant was asked to describe the benefit gained with the variance and demonstrate how other alternatives would not reasonably attain that benefit. The applicant indicated that to reconstruct the porch, deteriorated portions of the wooden columns must be replaced. That bluestone was the preferred method adopted by the applicant because it is not subjected to the rotting that occurred in the wood bases, and that the longevity of the material of bluestone has a life expectancy of 100+ years, whereas wood has a life expectancy of 18 years or so, and that it is more aesthetically pleasing.
So I guess he's saying that he considered using wood, but decided not to because he didn't want to have to replace it in 18 years.
Yeah, and I want to also point out that we did send out a letter to the applicant, notice to the applicant with all of these variance cases, advising the applicants of what staff would indicate would be incomplete information. Staff noted out that this did not include an argument for what the benefit is. The applicant didn't identify the benefit to be able to demonstrate the alternatives on that. So that might make it difficult for us to kind of interpret this. But just to be sure, that letter is also in the case files as well, just so that it's clear what the staff had requested as additional documents from the applicant.
Yeah, I hate to be a pest, but I think they should probably sharpen their argument a little bit and just answer the question. So basically, Louise, although you pop back onto to mute, is bluestone the only alternative that was considered?
Yes, that was listed on the application. It was the only one that was listed on there.
Now, I know that the neighborhood design allows the use of treated wood as long as it's painted within 6 months. Was treated wood also considered? Because it doesn't, I wouldn't think that treated wood only has a life expectancy of 18 years. So he may want to, or they may want to just be a little bit more specific as to what the alternatives were that they looked at and what were the benefits and the burdens. More questions, folks? Okay, want to keep going, Louis?
For sustainability or substantiality, rather, the applicant was asked to demonstrate why the requested variance is not a substantial or contextually significant deviation from the prevailing regulation. The applicant stated that the variance is not a substantial departure because there is no conformity on the block face. The porch dimensions and slope remain unchanged. The wooden column tops, balusters, and railings are retained, and other properties have a more substantial deviations from original design. They cited enclosed porches as an example of that.
Well, the first and the fourth bullet are irrelevant. Are there any other porches, as Regis' question again, are there other porches that have replaced the wooden bottoms of the columns with bluestone? Sorry, I'll end in a question mark. Are you aware of any bluestone bottom columns in the zone, Louis?
No, I think this is a unique one in that case.
And you might want to address that issue. Now, when you sent them background information, Luis, did you send them other asks for this zone to change porches?
Do you mean examples of other requests or permits for porch redesign? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I did not. Do you mean like other porches that were denied in for character, or?
Yeah, or granted. I mean, just this is an issue that pops up in this part of the city over and over again, and it's not as if, you know, even in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of these porch cases. Okay.
We do have two, at least in my three in my tenure.
Yeah.
Denied because they were removals of a porch, and one was a modification of a porch that was approved. So I do know there are at least three within the past couple of years.
Yeah.
I believe the addresses were Park Ave, Morris, and then out by Stewart's on New Scotland, if you're looking through the case files.
Good memory. Okay. Folks, any questions about this issue of substantiality? It's not, and I think as Louisa said to everybody at one point, none of these elements are issue determinative by their own. We balance them, but I think you might want to do a slightly better argument about why it's not a substantial deviation. But okay, you want to go on the next one, Louise?
Impact on the environment. The applicant was asked to describe potential impacts on factors such as drainage, traffic, circulation, dust, noise, odor, public services, etc. The applicant does not believe the variance will create adverse impacts, no change to impervious area, no additional traffic, dust, noise, odor, or need for public services, no impact on the environment.
Does anyone have any questions on that? Honestly, I think the only question that would be worth asking here is Martin's question, which you always ask, which is, how will this affect the drainage onto the property by moving the stairs and changing the pitch?
Seems to be in situ replacement, 1 for 1.
Okay.
If they're not demonstrating any change in the dimensions of the porch, it's 100% within the footprint.
Yeah. Okay. You want to keep going, Louise?
And finally, for self-created difficulty, the applicant was asked to explain why the variance is not self-created, and the applicant's indicating that the requested changes may be considered self-created, but that the need to replace the deteriorated columns was not self-created as it relates to the age and moisture of the columns.
Okay. You may just want to ask, we may want to ask him why the need to change, or his expressed need to change the deteriorated columns required the replacement of so much else of the porch. Because it's not an issue of just the bottoms of the columns or the columns. There's a lot more being done than just that. Does anyone have any more questions for the applicant? Okay. Continue on, sir.
Okay, so the second variance is area variance 0066, and these will go through the same 3 regulations as the others. So this is building design standards for building materials. So this one is relating to original materials being retained, maintained, repaired, or uncovered wherever possible to the maximum extent feasible. New buildings and alterations shall be composed of materials that are complement to adjacent facades and are compatible with the quality and appearance of traditional materials. The applicant made the same 4 arguments as with the interpretations with regards to this in their supplemental materials. And additionally, on the application, the applicant indicated that the proposed porch is mostly retained and replaced with matching materials, including portions, spacing, balusters, and railings. The applicant believes bluestone bases complement adjacent facades, and being compatible does not mean being identical.
Any questions, folks? All right, you want to keep going, Lily?
For alternatives considered, the applicant was asked to describe the benefit gained and demonstrate how other alternatives would not reasonably attain this benefit. The applicant indicated as similar to the previous variances that the deteriorated portions of the wooden columns needed to be replaced and bluestone was preferred because of the rotting that would be prevented from bluestone over wood and its longevity.
Question? No? Let's keep going.
For substantiality, the argument is the same as the previous one. The applicant was asked to demonstrate why the requested variance is now substantial or contextually significant deviation from the prevailing regulation, and they indicated that it is not a substantial departure because the conformity to the block face, or that there is none. The porch dimensions and slope remain unchanged, and the wood column tops, balusters, and railings are retained.
Any questions that we want Louise to submit to the applicant? I'll take that as a no. Okay, you want to keep going, Louise?
So impact on environment, this is the same with the previous area variance. No adverse impacts are expected from the proposal.
Okay, keep going, sir.
And lastly, self-created difficulty, that it might be self-created, but that the need relates to the age and moisture of the columns. So the last one is area variance 0067, and this relates to regulation 375-4G4DI. All porches shall be retained in their original style with appropriate supports, balusters, railings, and frame latticework to the maximum extent practicable. The applicant argued the same arguments as the previous ordinance, variances and interpretations with the four main arguments. The area variance application was supplemented with the statement that the applicant states the original style is maintained as it matches the supports, balusters, and railings, albeit with a change in materials on one element.
Why don't you keep going, Louise? And let me ask you, members of the board, do you believe that you're going to ask any questions as we go through the same elements on this piece of the statute?
I think we covered pretty much everything there is to say.
There's a few elements that are different on the area variance application, so if there are any questions, just stop me as I go along.
Okay.
I would be curious to an answer to how is change in materials not change in style?
The three ordinances that were applied, one of them applies to porch style, the last ordinance, which this one is, and the other one was relating specifically to materials, so that there's differentiations in that sense as far as the ordinance is concerned. So there's the prevailing one, the first one that just says infill construction needs to be compatible with the neighborhood. And then there's one that talks specifically about the materials, and then one that specifically talks about the design, or the style rather, separately. So I think I think that's what the applicant is saying, that there's a change in materials on one of them, but that the style is maintained because it matches the support balusters and railings. I'm not sure if that answers your questions or.
I'll try to think of a different way to reword it, but I'm fine to move on.
So alternatives considered, the same argument as previous, but on the variance application, the applicant indicated that there was no conformity on the block face, and the porch dimensions remained unchanged, and that the wooden column tops, balusters, and railings would be retained. For impact on environment, the applicant indicates that there would be no adverse impacts from the proposal. And self-created difficulty, the applicant indicates that it could be considered self-created, but that the need relates to the age and moisture of the columns. That's it for that one.
And Paige, just as a practical matter, this is not your only chance to get Louise to ask that question of them and have them respond before our public hearing in the fourth Wednesday. So if you think about it while we're offline later, like, just send it to Louise, okay?
Sounds good.
Same goes for everybody else, please. All right, keep going, sir.
So the next case is 961 State Street. This is a proposal for an installation of 169 linear feet of 6-foot, 100% opaque fencing and 50 feet of linear or 50 linear feet of chain link fencing in a front yard area. These are both of these fences are in a front yard area. This request would require a variance on 3 accounts. One for the height of the fence, which would be 6 feet, where the requirement is 4 feet. One for the opacity of the fence, where the proposal is 100% opaque versus the 60% maximum opacity allowed. And the third one would be for the chain link fencing in the front yard, which is currently not allowed in a front yard area where the applicant is proposing to install it. So this application has substantial deficiencies, so I can't show a complete application. One of them specifically is a site plan. It shows exactly where the placement of the fences will be and the chain link fencing. But I can show you the uniqueness of this specific lot on the block. This is in the Pine Hills neighborhood as well. The lot actually, if you can see this second picture here, takes up the width of the block. So it has a frontage facing State Street as well as Spring Street. So in this case here, because we define front yard area as the side of the space between the facade of a house facing the street and the lot line, what you would understand typically to be a front yard area would be the space between the front door and the street. Because it takes up the width of the block, the space between the rear facade of the house and the street is also considered a front yard area. So any fencing on either side of those extremes would be considered fencing in a front yard area, where the regulation would have a 4-foot maximum, 60% opacity, and no chain link fencing regulation on it. So the applicant is looking to put 6-foot tall, 100% opaque fencing and chain link fencing in some combination on this lot. But I asked for a more detailed site plan to know specifically where it was going to be placed for this project. But that's the idea here. This is the zoning. This is an R2 district, and you can see the surrounding zoning districts. And this is the property in question. As you can see, what looks to be the front door and steps face onto State Street, and the width of the lot extends to the other side onto Spring Street. So the ordinance in question for walls and fences, the general standards, Part A, walls and fences may be located in any front yard or exterior side yard facing the street, provided they are no more than 4 feet in height and no more than 60% opaque, except as required to comply with screening requirements in section 375-4, F5 and 6. So the applicant was asked to demonstrate how the proposed project is in character with the surrounding neighborhood. And the applicant indicated that the property is directed at State Street, oriented towards State Street, and several homes have chain link fences extending to the sidewalk and 6-foot fences extending past the front wall plane. The property is only unique because it occupies a double lot layout.
Luis, I'd like to see the applicant provide some, maybe provide some examples of what the surrounding homes have. Because in the pictures that were provided in the application, I don't think, it was very clear whether those fences or, similar fencing were on Spring Street or State Street, or, if it was backyard, front yard, that sort of thing.
Are there any other questions from the board?
There are, if you look at Albany Map Geo is a really good tool that the city has. It's their property information system. I would recommend people look at that as something to be able to view details about properties, property lines. I think Louise is looking at right now. That's publicly accessible, but you can get a good idea of other lots in the neighborhood that also, in the applicant here is stating it's a double lot, which is about definition, whether it's true or not. But there are other lots in similar circumstances between Spring and Washington, and down as you go down State and Spring, there are other lots of that style as well, which I wish the council would step into this side lot, back lot, front lot issue and be able to sort this out, because it's still frustrating to be deciding these on a case-by-case basis like this. I'll just put that out there.
You have an opinion, Martin?
I would like some guidance from the council to clean this up if they see a different interpretation of how this is written. If they see backyards as backyards and front yards as front yards, it seems like the way that the law is written and the public's interpretation are two different things, and just seems like an opportunity for the council to step in and clean it up.
When is the full-scale 6-month review starting, Louise, of the USDO?
Well, it's in effect. I think that, from my understanding, Brad is in the process of working with the Common Council and has submitted a draft of some recommended changes, and so I believe it's working its way in committee.
Is that the next meeting of the Land Use Committee that's talking about the USDO?
I do believe, maybe. We send out copies of the USDO. Maybe Amy can.
The next meeting, I believe, of the committee is not looking at the USDO changes. The next meeting is looking at the demolition and historic structure issues. The council had asked for the renumbering and copy edits to be done by March, but there's been a lot of back and forth just in terms of figuring out, which document is correct. And I haven't been particularly involved in the renumbering, but I can tell you that it's still going on.
Okay. Thanks. You want to keep going, Louise, or did you have another question on which front is the front, Martin?
I just wanted to vent.
Okay.
I appreciate the workload, but there seems to be a disconnect between the way that the law is written and how properties are laid out. And I just think it needs another set of eyes on the legislative side to be able to work some of these issues out pragmatically.
Okay, so alternatives considered. The applicant was asked to describe the benefit gained with the variance and demonstrate how other alternatives would not reasonably attain the benefit. The applicant listed privacy as a benefit and states that Spring Street is in a higher elevation, which allows lookers to easily view the property. Indicates that the compliance or a compliant fence was not considered because the level of privacy would not be comparable to the proposed fence, and that landscaping as an option was not considered because it increased the potential damage to fences due to its placement, and would also result in a loss of yard space and a financial challenge due to the opportunity cost to install the landscaping.
That's not a very strong argument, given the fact that other people have had to comply with this obligation.
You have a question for them, Martin?
I'm just that argument could be strengthened quite significantly if they're looking to supplement their application. We don't like it. Just isn't a strong argument.
What does increased potential to damage fence mean?
So I think the applicant indicated that putting a like a tree or a shrub next to a fence would damage the fence as it grows out.
Yeah, I'm with Martin. They got to do better.
That would be a very poor quality fence if that was the case. If arborvitae would damage a fence by standing next to it, but I'm just gonna leave it there.
So he might, as Martin said, or they might just say why the alternative of landscaping wouldn't attain privacy, which is the benefit, not damage fence, loss of yard space, and financial opportunity cost. He needs to address the benefit, not this other stuff, which honestly makes no sense to me. So if you could ask him to sharpen that argument, as Martin said, that would be useful. Are there other questions for the applicant on this element? Okay, you want to keep going, Louis?
For substantiality, the applicant indicated that the variance is not substantial because the lot spans the width of the block.
Yeah, he needs to actually answer the question, or they need to answer the question. That's not an answer. So if they could just redo that, that would be very useful. Try to keep going? Or does anyone have any questions on this issue? Okay, want to give us the next one, Louis?
Impact on the environment. The applicant indicated that the impact would be that there would be a reduction in trash blowing onto the property and reduced noise onto the property with the fence.
I think they just need to understand that relates to external impacts rather than internal impacts.
Yeah, what he said. Any other questions, or you want to move on? I take the shaky heads as let's go. Let's go to the next one, please, sir.
Lastly, self-created difficulty. The applicant indicated it is not self-created because the property was sold as a double lot and maintained as a single lot.
Yeah, they should rewrite this answer too. Okay, any other questions on this element? No, do you want to keep going, Louis?
Yep. From here on out, since they're similar, I'll just keep going, and if anyone has any questions, they can stop me along the way.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, actually, they're same actually for all of them.
Their narrative, which was included with the application, didn't differentiate whether they were speaking to the height or the opacity of the portion of fence that they were requesting a variance for, or the inclusion of a chain link fence. It was just very difficult to determine to which responses went to which fence or which variance they were looking for.
Yep.
I think they just need to separate their argument to, these are the arguments for the opacity and the taller fence. These are the arguments for the chain link fence. That would help us make, if we needed to, our decisions separately on those issues.
I will relay that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also helpful for them to define the type of fence they're looking for. Are they looking for a plastic fence, a stockade fence? Like what's typically an applicant doesn't just say, I want a fence, they'll come to us and be able to describe what that fence is so that we can determine the quality of its construction. So that's also missing from the application.
Especially that's not really clear what the mix was the chain link. I don't know, maybe when we get into that part, there'll be more, but it sounds like it's not all chain link, right?
It looked like the chain link was on the side to some degree, and the fully opaque fence was on the back, but it was hard to tell from the diagram. And maybe that's me. Maybe I just didn't read it right.
Yeah, so this would apply for the rest of the two ordinance variances they're requesting.
Want to go to the next ordinance or the next section of the code?
Well, I hadn't built out the rest of it. I only got the one on there because I wasn't able to articulate or separate the arguments onto what applied to which one.
Okay.
So we'll leave it at the narrative was meant to apply to all of them, but that we'll work with the applicant to try and get them to separate their arguments into each ordinance or variance being requested.
Yeah, I don't see how we can reasonably give them a hearing if we don't know what they're asking for. So you might want to clarify for them that we're not going to put this on the calendar for the hearing until they fix the application. This is not adjudicable, period. Okay, do you want to keep going, Louis?
Yeah, so the next case is 161 Washington Avenue Extension, Suite 104, applicant Jeremy O'Brien. The request is for an installation of, actually the proposal is not been carried over, but the proposal is a 94.7 square foot wall sign being installed. And the variance being requested is a 32 or 94 square foot wall sign, where a 32 square foot wall sign is the maximum allowed. So the ordinance here, it relates to wall signs. I think this one got changed, actually. But the ordinance requires a 32-foot square max wall sign in a mixed-use community highway zoning district. And the applicant is requesting 94 square feet. This is a rendering of the sign itself on the storefront. This is the proposed location of it at Crossgate Commons. And this would be as proposed at 94.7 square feet.
Luis, if I could, that measurement, is that derived from measuring the block letters, or is that measured from the entire structure? I know sometimes it's different depending on the type of sign.
This one was a box wall sign, so we take the length and width. We only apply a different square footage measuring from if it's a channel letter sign. So if they're individual letters or shapes mounted on a rail system, then we would take the measurement of the shape itself, whether it be letters or a logo or what have you. But
so that, forgive me if I'm using the wrong terminology here. So in a rail sign, the void space, the space between the letters, is not counted. But if the applicant takes the same, let's say they're white letters, they take the same white letters and they mount them to a black 2x4, a piece of wood, and mount that 2x4 to the wall, the city uses the measurement of the entire structure of the 2x4 plus the letters in making their determination for sign size?
I don't think that generally it doesn't. The difference there is that the box wall sign is all one construction. It's self-contained in that sense.
Okay.
So we wouldn't get into making the determination as to what is copy and what is background on that. we would just assume whatever is proposed to us as a box wall sign is all copy and be part of the calculation. But whereas in a
okay.
rail system, there's negative space where there is literally no sign, so we wouldn't constitute that as part of the background to measure it. So that's how we differentiate where to apply the square footage on that, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Ready to keep going, Louis?
So the applicant was asked to demonstrate how the proposal is in character with the surrounding neighborhood, and the applicant indicated that it would be in character as there are many large signs that are larger than what is being proposed.
The response to that question is, if those signs are larger, were they approved under the current USDO or the prior USDO, which had completely different sign standards?
Yep. And I also want to
applicant
iterate
needs to-
that there were some signs that came before the board previously that were requesting for sign variances, and those did not, most of them did not need to get a variance. They were withdrawn because the applicant had an option of using the special on-premises sign program. This property in particular, because it's between two properties, does not have that option. Doesn't have a second frontage, so that does not qualify for that. And there have not been any variances since the 2017 ordinance for signs at this specific location, and the other signs were done under our previous ordinance. Just to get some context on this sign. So for alternatives considered, the applicant was asked to describe the benefit gained with the variance and demonstrate how other alternatives would not reasonably attain the benefit. The applicant indicated that a smaller sign would look out of place among the larger signs, and that the benefit sought was an even playing field with other businesses in that respect.
So I'll ask if they're going to bring up the argument of an even playing field with other businesses. The business next door is Planet Fitness. Other businesses in the plaza seem to be offering different goods and services. Is the applicant saying that there is a competitive marketplace for the product that they're selling with the other businesses? It's hard to follow.
The applicant mentioned in the application that there was a perception of a lower investment or a consideration to the investment in their business being advertised with a smaller sign.
Okay.
And I believe when they made that application statement in their supplemental materials, that's what they're trying to relate and connect back to the even playing field.
Does that also carry over to the materials that are used to construct the sign?
To confirm. For substantiality, the applicant was asked to demonstrate why the requested variance is not substantial or contextually significant deviation from the prevailing regulation, and the applicant indicated it was just a matter of having a larger sign, which I've already instructed the applicant to make sure that they have a better articulated argument or just a yes or no objective answer on that one. I was trying to clarify with the applicant before the meeting.
If you go back to the elevation that shows the exterior of the building, if you could, are there, one question the applicant may want to answer in their application is if there are pre-existing mounts or stylistic elements of the building that necessitate a larger sign or prevent them from putting in a smaller sign. That's what I'm curious about. Is there a lease that requires the sign to be in a certain spot on the building? Or mounted in a specific way?
Okay, impact on the environment. The applicant was asked to describe potential impacts on factors such as drainage, traffic, circulation, dust, noise, odor, public services. The applicant indicated there would not be any impact.
Back up 2 slides, Louise. Sorry, one more. So you said that his provided essentially a social rationale. Can you provide us with the source of this? Looking into people's minds that are going to think that he hasn't invested in his business. I mean, is there a retail council or something that says smaller sign equals someone who doesn't care about their business or whatnot? Because otherwise, we're just supposed to take his word for it. And ask him if there are any other alternatives that he considers besides a sign that's 3 times the square footage of the allowed sign, such as 2 times the square footage, or 2.5 times the square footage, or 1.5 times the square footage. If you can move to the next slide, then, Louise.
And the last point, the applicant did not actually answer whether they thought the variance was self-created and difficulty or not, which I will get an answer from the applicant on that.
Yeah, to that degree, if there's a requirement by the industry or by, if they're a, let's say if they're a franchisee and they're selling a product, is there a requirement that the owner of the product or the parent company requires the franchisee to have a certain sign? I mean, is there some sort of requirement placed upon them as selling the item that requires them to have a certain sign? That's something that would be good to supplement the record with.
And please ask him to actually answer the question. If you go back 2 slides, Louise, sorry, you skipped by. So ask him why something that's 3 times the square footage allowable is not substantial. Please. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions on this application?
All
Okay,
right.
Louise.
So the next case is 899 Western Avenue. The applicant is Capital Communications Federal Credit Union. Representing agent is AJ Signs, Thomas Wheeler. The request here, it didn't copy over, unfortunately, but the request is for a monument sign that is 8 feet in height, and the sign itself being 50 square feet, where the requirement is a 5-foot maximum height of a monument sign and a 32 square feet maximum size. So the regulation that would apply here is, let's see, I think I have that actually. Nope, I do not, unfortunately. Let me bring up the application here. So this would be the same regulation as the signage for the previous case. Bring that up here. So freestanding signs in the mixed-use neighborhood edge, 1 per frontage, 64 or 20 square feet for size, and then 5 feet for the maximum height. So I'll just run through the application here because I didn't get a chance to put this into the PowerPoint. So the applicant indicated for a character of the neighborhood and how the proposal would not result in a structure or configuration that would be out of place in the neighborhood. The new sign panel will be installed reusing the existing brick monument structure. The property is adjacent to other offices and within half-mile of other larger signs. This sign will not have an impact on the character of the neighborhood. And while you're considering that, let me pull up a picture of the actual sign. So this is a rendering of the sign itself. It's square shaped, 86.5 inches on either side. And this is a rendering of where the proposed location is. And this is the location of the property itself. I believe this is where the sign is. All right, so the applicant provided two examples as well of the property across the street, All Saints Academy, and the Presbyterian Church, I believe, across the street, and the Harriman campus sign off Western Avenue just down the street. So I did want to note that specifically this sign is on state property, so we wouldn't be applicable since the ordinance doesn't apply to that property. But the applicant provided those as evidence of what signs are in the immediate area that would have it be in character with.
Yep.
So for alternatives considered, the applicant indicated that the sign is part of their brand logo, and the new logo for Capcom is a square. And the width dictates the height because of that shape, and all of their locations will have the same shaped sign for brand consistency.
Can you ask
Goes
the
back to my-
applicant to amend that to put none? That's what all the words add up to. So they might want to clarify that they have considered no alternative.
And that goes back to my question about how the sign is measured, because in this case, you're measuring the full space of whatever's composed within the blue square, correct? That's all part of the sign. So our consideration is everything within that pre-built brick monument structure as the sign, correct?
Yes, so there's, for this one, there's two elements. There's the height and the size. So in this case, the height would be from the base of the structure itself to how do we determine that? Just give me a sec. It's the base of heights to the top of the sign. Is that how it is? No. The interpretation has kind of gone through a couple of iterations. So I believe the most current interpretation of how we interpret monument signs is the base plus sign. So the total sign in that sense. Versus previously we just counted the height of the sign without the base.
Yeah, it makes
So-
sense. Otherwise, somebody could put an unlimited base with a sign on top and say the height of the sign was the sign.
Right.
Right?
Yep. So there's a base height, or there's a sign height in that sense, and then there's a sign of the size of the actual sign on the base. So in this
Okay.
case, there are two parts of the ordinance they're requesting variances from.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because this comes down to the size of that blue square. It's not a matter of if we asked, let's just say that we consider the variance based upon the size of the font or the white letter and graphic features of the sign notwithstanding. No matter what the size of those features would be, the way that the variance, the way that the code is written is the sign shall be considered the size of everything that composes, in this case, the blue square. So I just want to make sure that I understand that everything within that blue space is what we're considering the size of the sign.
Yes.
And I guess to turn that into a question to ask the applicant, Louise, could you ask him if, could you go back to the picture of the blue sign? Could you ask them if the size of the letters is the same as the existing sign? And so the size of the individual letters plus the space they take up of just the words. And then second, if the space within the inside square, the white square, if that's the same as the existing sign. And the difference is mostly just the blue around it. Since that's kind of, it sounds like that's what's bothering you right now, Martin.
It's not bothering me. I just want to get an understanding that, that there's the monument structure around the sign, but what we're considering is the blue square as the sign, and what's within that blue square, the size of it is almost irrelevant. And that comes to an understanding of what would need to be replaced or modified in order for alternatives to be considered. I just want to get an understanding of how that would work.
So if I understand you correctly, does the base require a sign of a certain size because of the way it's constructed? Is that?
Well, that's one part of it, yes.
Okay, so for substantiality, the applicant indicated that the additional 18 square feet was needed to maintain their logo lockup, and it should not be seen as a significant deviation from the prevailing regulation. This is a highly trafficked section of Western Avenue, and larger signs will have greater visibility and will allow motorists more time to find the bank and make a decision to make a turn, which will increase safety for patrons. The bank does not have direct access from Western Avenue, so extra time to find the entrance to the bank is important for safety.
Any questions, folks? Okay, keep going, Louise.
An impact on the environment. The applicant indicates that they're proposing to remove the existing rectangular shaped sign box and replace it with a square sign box, and there will be no impact to the environment. And for self-created difficulty, the applicant indicates that the new sign could be seen as a self-created difficulty.
Okay, I don't have any questions. Does anyone have any that they want to ask? Hearing none. Keep going, sir. You're on mute, Louis.
Sorry, that was it for the new cases. The pending agenda items are 1415 Washington Avenue and 255 Clinton Avenue, which currently do not have action from the planning board for seeker determination. So they will not be able to be, there's no action that the board can take on these pending cases at this time.
Okay.
Still. And then 36 nuisance, or 36 Judson Avenue was a nuisance case.
Yeah, same thing. We're awaiting action by another municipal entity. Okay. Amy, do you want to mention your potential instruction for the next workshop?
Which instructions are those?
The one that you did for the planning board, but the BZA version.
Oh yeah, so last night at the planning board, in response to some discussions that have been ongoing for a while, I gave them a pretty quick presentation just outlining the state legislation that authorizes planning boards and that sets out their powers and their, the structure of planning boards, their powers and authority. I also went through the city code provisions that are not in the USDO. So they're code provisions that they might not be as familiar with. And I provided some additional background information to them about kind of just the history of planning boards in New York State, how they were envisioned, how the legislature has changed them over the last 100 years or so, just to try and help give them an idea of sort of, what the extent of their abilities are and how they might be able to, to use their authorities, maybe in ways that they haven't before.
Okay, and you were proposing to do something like that at our next workshop meeting?
Yeah, I was gonna put together, again, the legislation that authorizes zoning boards in New York State, and then the provisions of the city code that aren't in the USDO. Zoning boards are a little bit, they're less complicated than planning boards, I would say. So, to the extent that I can find a bit more background information about zoning boards, I can certainly do that as well. But I think it goes back somewhat to the idea that the zoning board is somewhat quasi-judicial in character. As in tonight, you have these appeals where you're exercising this authority to sort of decide what things mean, whereas planning boards tend to be a little bit more on the quasi-legislative side, where they're creating policies as opposed to just interpreting things that already exist. So in that respect, like I said, I think the BZA is a little bit simpler to kind of understand the function and role in this broader system of planning.
Okay, so I think that'll be a welcome addition to our workshop next time around. So please keep us in the loop. Go ahead, Adriana.
Any chance it would count toward our training or whatever requirements?
I mean, I think it would depend on how long I go. I mean, I can certainly give an hour-long presentation about BZAs, but I mean, I think that my presentation at the planning board last night was like maybe 10 minutes. It was probably not that long.
Fair enough.
Nice try, Adriana.
The clerk would hate you for asking the city to certify planning zoning credits in 10-minute increments.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's it for tonight, unless anyone has anything. Martin, do you have any?
Yeah. Oh, did somebody else say something? I would just add that.
It's like, yes, no. And believe me, I'm going to have a hard time.
You're turning Japanese.
Oh, stop it.
Somebody else's microphone. Somebody talking about taking Japanese. Somebody's mic is open. I'll just mention CDRPC, our annual planning and zoning webinar series will take place starting March 17th and running through April 12th. We're going to have a series of educational webinars and anything from clean energy to best practices on stormwater management to Board of Zoning Appeals and planning board operations. It will be, we will seek continuing education credits for folks that have AICP accreditation through the American Planning Association. And these have been approved in the past. The city of Albany has approved them for your 4 hours of training. So we'll have a series of 10 webinars, so you can certainly get your 4 hours and even extra time to apply till next year. We're still putting together the slate that'll be announced, but we should have registrations open next week, and people will be able to sign up for that series. I'll send an email to Luis, and I'm sure he'll pass it along.
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, because I don't remember, like, I think we don't register individually. Lewis just does it, right? Is that how it worked last year?
I think he registered you.
Yeah, so the if you attend the training session and you get a certificate for your attending, then I can take those and we can certify those. If you don't get that, so you watched the webinar that was pre-recorded, you can just advise us that you watched that webinar and we'll certify that attendance for you. And then we'll send it over to the clerk's office.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Luis. And thank you, council.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Nice to see the new faces.
Yeah, pleasure. And we'll see you all at the next meeting, the public hearing. Have a great rest of the week and weekend. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night.